However, the growing friendship between Begin and Sadat did not prevent disagreements between them, and the negotiations did not go as smoothly as hoped. Momentum was gained at the Camp David summit outside Washington in September of 1978, where the Israeli, Egyptian, and American delegations isolated themselves for 11 days to continue talks, which produced a framework of agreements for peace. These agreements were made possible in part due to difficult concessions that Menachem Begin agreed to make. The greatest was the agreement to carry out a complete phased withdrawal from the entire Sinai Peninsula, which included the evacuation of Jewish communities there, including Naot Sinai Mushav, which Begin had joined just as a member at the beginning of that year, and Yamit as well. And I'm going to speak about this in a supplementary video. Even before the peace agreement was ratified and signed, Menachem Begin earned international recognition and honor when he was given the Nobel Peace Prize in December of 1978, together with his Egyptian partner to the peace efforts. However, Sadat himself did not travel to Oslo to accept the prize and instead had a representative sent. Begin went to Oslo and in his acceptance speech said, "The prize was not only mine, it belongs to my nation, for terrible suffering it has undergone, for the many losses of life, for its love of peace and its deep longing for it." In his speech at the signing of the peace agreement 3 months later, he admitted, "This is the third greatest day in my life. The first was May 14, 1948, when our flag was flown and our independence declared in the land of our ancestors. The second was when Jerusalem became an undivided city. And now I have signed a peace agreement with our neighbor, Egypt. My heart overflows." The assassination of President Anwar Sadat by fanatical Muslims on October 6th of 1981 during a military parade in Cairo, marking the 8th anniversary of the October War, as the Yom Kippur War is known in Egypt, awakened fears of the fate of the peace agreement. But Menachem Begin did not hesitate to declare that the evacuation of the Sinai would be completed on schedule in accordance to the commitment Israel took upon itself. The agreement, and that is exactly what happened. In April of 1982, 9 years after it was established, the city of Yamit was completely demolished. April 1982, bringing an end to all the communities in the flourishing district. A bitter struggle to those that opposed the withdrawal from the Sinai did not lead to bloodshed, but the sights deeply pained the members of Naot Sinai sitting in the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. At that time, Begin was already standing at the head of his second government after leading the Likud to its second victory in elections that had been moved up to 1981. The cries of Begin, Begin once again reverberated through the Israeli streets and squares. This government was based upon the narrow Knesset majority of only 61 seats, which forced Begin to make far-reaching concessions to his religious coalition partners in various areas of legislation. The internal conflicts in the nation deepened in the election campaign. The increasingly sharp traditional differences between the right and the left were overshadowed by the rancor between Israel's religious and secular communities and between its Ashkenazi and Sephardi populations. Operation Peace for the Galilee. After securing a peace agreement with Egypt, even after it cooled down quite a bit after Hosni Mubarak became president, Menachem Begin found the time to deal with other issues on which his positions were no less firm. He set in motion the application of the Israeli law on the Golan Heights. Israeli Air Force planes bombed the Iraq's nuclear reactor in Baghdad. In the ancestral lands of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, the establishment of Jewish communities was considerably stepped up. And there was yet another front where Begin left his mark, the internal social one. It was Menachem Begin that removed the division between the Ashkenazi elites of the first Israel and the second Israel, promoted the advancement of development towns, launched the nationwide Project Renewal, and rebuilt poor neighborhoods and injected the poorer members of Israeli society with new pride. As the ingrained seeker of justice and truth, in March of 1982, Menachem Begin set in motion the establishment of a national commission of inquiry into the murder of Chaim Alazarov, whose killing triggered terrible strife and hostility in the Zionist camp for many, many years. The commission determined that despite the accusations at the time, the revisionists had nothing to do with the murder of the great Jewish leader in 1933. As the terrorists stationed in southern Lebanon escalated their attacks on Israel's northern settlements, and in the wake of an attempted assassination of Israel's ambassador in London, the Israeli Defense Forces were given orders on June 5th of 1982 to launch Operation Peace for the Galilee. Menachem Begin had hoped that the campaign would last a few days, but it would not reach beyond a radius of 40 to 45 kilometers from Israel's border. He even declared that after it, the land will rest for 40 years. Unfortunately, that is not how it turned out. Despite the destruction of the terrorist bases in southern Lebanon and forced removal of the PLO terrorists from Beirut, notwithstanding the agreement Israel made with Lebanon, the war dragged on for many months. The continuing war, the large number of Israeli casualties, 666 killed, and the massacre of a Palestinian refugee camp by Christian phalangists in the Sabra and Khaltilia camps all left their marks on the tormented Prime Minister of Israel. Resignation and seclusion. The developments in the wake of the controversial Peace for the Galilee War, an increasingly acrimonious internal debate, and the conclusions of the Kahan Commission report into the massacre in the refugee camps, we found no reason to acquit the Prime Minister of responsibility for not showing any interest in the actions of the Phalange fighters in the camps during the cabinet sessions and afterwards. We are unable to accept his explanations, and that he was entirely unaware of the dangers of a massacre greatly disheartened the Prime Minister. To this should be added his profound sorrow over the death of his beloved wife Eliza on November 13th of 1982, while he was abroad on official business and on increasing his own physical weakness. Indeed, Begin's poor health, heart problems, and major surgery he had to undergo following a fall in his bath, after which he was forced to use a walking stick, all restricted the Prime Minister's movements, often keeping him at home. They did not, however, undermine his leadership or affect his ability to make decisions, although in a deep gloom. It overtook him and severely interfered with his work as Prime Minister, and it was said with his attentiveness at cabinet sessions. Begin celebrated his 70th birthday in the presence of just a few close friends and family members, and exactly 1 month and 5 days later, on September 15, 1983, he announced his resignation to the cabinet. He uttered but one sentence: "I feel that I can no longer continue," thus bringing an end to the brilliant political career and closing an important chapter on the history of the State of Israel. Many expected Begin to write a book about the generation of the Holocaust and rebirth to which he so often alluded when first elected Prime Minister in 1977. He declared that he planned to serve until the age of 70 and then would devote himself to writing a great book, The Generation of the Holocaust and the Rebirth. Begin, after all, had been a prolific writer over the years and had written hundreds of articles and 2 books, White Nights and The Revolt. A collection of underground posters and radio broadcasts that he wrote, called Writings from the Underground, were also published. His resignation marked the final chapter in Menachem Begin's biography, a sad one of seclusion and isolation in his apartments at 1 Tzemach Street in Jerusalem and 4 Glicksberg Street in Tel Aviv, where he spent the final year and a half of his life. Begin consciously and determinedly resolved to completely cut himself off from all public and political activities. These were years of almost total and ascetic seclusion, which saddened all of his friends and comrades in arms, as well as the general population, who expected some kind of explanation from him for his sudden departure from public life. None, however, was forthcoming. To his dying day, Begin refused to respond to appeals from his friends, reporters of the public, figures to sum up his terms in office in a speech or a letter, and thereby satisfy the curiosity of the public as to why he had suddenly abandoned the helm of his ship. He took his secret to the grave, and it's doubtful if any of the few people that continued to frequent his home in those final years of the silent and obscure decline, Yichel Kiddishai, Dan Meridor, Yaakov Meridor, Harry Hurwitz, and of course his devoted family members, heard any explanation from him that they may one day reveal to the public. The public was able to catch glimpses of Menachem Begin only thanks to the hordes of press and television photographers and cameramen that hounded him on those very few occasions when he left his home. For the annual memorial service for his late wife Eliza, and when he was hospitalized due to an illness, or when he needed an operation on his knee following his second fall in his apartment. Menachem Begin moved from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv on August 20th of 1990. He had been hospitalized for a few weeks in the capital Shari Tzedek Hospital, and from there was taken to Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv. The newspaper photographs showed Menachem Begin taken in a wheelchair. I felt that I was taking part in the history of the state of Israel, said one of the female soldiers that helped wheel Begin on his return to Tel Aviv after 13 years of service and activity in Jerusalem. Many ordinary citizens wrote to him during the years of his retirement and seclusion to invite him to various events. He responded to all those letters with brief words of thanks, sometimes adding relevant commentary on the events of the distant past or of the present. On his birthdays, on Shabbat Nahamu, each year he opened his home to his friends, and the members of the fighting family, who deeply moved and stirred, came to his home to meet him once again with their commander and leader. On such days, letters and telegrams of congratulations filled his home. On Shabbat Nahamu in 1988, when Begin turned 75 years old, Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir wrote to him, "Each year when this day arrives, all his friends, admirers, disciples, along with the multitudes of Jews in Israel, and all their thoughts turn to Menachem Begin, the commander of the Irgun Ze'ev Leumi, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, the great disciple of Ze'ev Jabotinsky, and the man who carried out his teachings. There are few people that have left a mark on the history of the Jewish people in our generation as Menachem Begin has been privileged to do. He fought for the establishment of the state, saw it arise, participated in the shaping of its character, and leading it to great deeds and enormous achievements. Very many among the Jewish people remember and will continue to remember his great deeds and accomplishments." Menachem Begin made his last journey to Jerusalem on a wintry day when he returned his soul to his Maker just before dawn on Monday, the 2nd of Adar, 5752. That's before dawn, Monday, on the 2nd of Adar, 5752. That is March 9th, 1992. March 9th of 1992. In accordance with his wishes, he was not given an official state funeral. Instead, laid to rest simple, dignified Jewish ceremony without eulogies, wreaths, or foreign dignitaries. Tens of thousands accompanied him on his final journey, and the streets of the capital overflowed with the legions of mourners that came out to show their love and admiration for him. Walking many kilometers to the Mount of Olives, where he is buried next to the grave of his beloved wife, the graves of Menachem and Eliza Begin on the Mount of Olives are located next to those of two underground heroes, Moshe Barazani of Lehi and Meir Feinstein of the Irgun, overlooking the Temple Mount. His son Benyan Ze'ev Begin said the traditional Kaddish at Yichel Kadishai, and his devoted aide recited Ela Malay Rahamim prayer. The Beitar anthem, whose third verse had become the Irgun anthem, was softly chanted by those present at the ceremony. Tens of thousands filed past the fresh grave to pay their last respects to a beloved leader. The sixth Prime Minister of the State of Israel, a Jewish commander, a soldier, and a statesman of a generation of the Holocaust and the rebirth of the State of Israel.